What's going on, everyone? Ruckman here with Crew3, here to talk about a deck I've been briefly mentioning a bunch of the podcast, spending a lot of my time actually playing, more so recently. It's probably the most deck I've played a lot ever since Karlov Manor came out, actually. It's been this Bant Delney deck list I've been working on. If you've played old Standard formats, it's kind of like the old Bant Company deck lists from like Oath of the Gatewatch Cons format. Now, I had promised gameplay footage, and there will be gameplay footage coming for this deck list. We've been getting over, my wife and I have been getting over a bout of COVID, and I just haven't really been in a good mental space to play yet, but I have been putting a lot of time in this deck list still that I thought it would be interesting to talk about sort of how the changes I made to this deck list from where it started when I initially brought up the deck list idea on the podcast to where we are now. So I thought let's start with the first version of the deck list, which for those of you who listen to our show, Crew3, of course, this is the deck list I brought up during our deck list ideas episode for Karlov Manor. So we're, of course, playing 2 copies of Gilded Goose, 2 copies of Charming Prince, 3 copies of Gala Greeters, 4 copies of Prosperous Innkeeper, 4 copies of Voice of Resurgence, 4 Delney Streetwise Lookout, 2 Skyclave Apparition, 3 copies of Aether Channeler, 2 copies of Tishana's Tidebinder, 4 copies of Reflector Mage, 3 copies of Spell Queller, and 4 copies of Collected Company with a pretty decent mana base here. Actually, I've been pretty happy with this mana base. I kind of took a Bant Company mana base and made some slight changes to it to better fit the difference in color distribution here. Obviously, we're a lot more heavy green and blue, so I just kind of moved things around a little bit from your usual kind of Bant Spirits mana base and kind of inverted some of the colors here, and I've been pretty happy with the mana base so far. What has changed, though, is kind of some of the core pieces of the deck list over time. So really, what we're looking at here is we're playing 2 Gilded Goose, kind of an okay turn 1 accelerant. It's also made pretty decent with Delney later on. We get 2 food, and then Prosperous Innkeeper here with Delney is a great way to help slow down the aggressive matchups. And as we're going on with the front right now, we're seeing things like Boros Convoke, even Mono White Humans pop back up in the meta. Having Prosperous Innkeeper here to gain us life, give us the treasure token to help us get set up a turn 3 company still, is a very big bonus to the deck. It's a great play. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're not really trying to set up and speed out our turn 3 plays as much as we are trying to set up for sure a turn 3 Collected Company, just so we can try to hit our Delney and try to start getting in some of these other big 3 drops for value here. Gala Greeters is a card I have been enjoying a lot. It does get a little clunky. Actually, this card really impressed me a lot when you have a Delney in play. If you're at a point where you're only playing 1 creature a turn still, with Gallagher's and Delney, this card is great. You tap treasure token, again, gain some life. The big problem is, though, if you have multiple creatures in the battlefield every turn, through multiple companies, or you have like just 2 cheap guys to play, you are priced into picking that 1/1 counter ability. So this card actually scales out of Delney range pretty quickly, which is okay, like still having a big beater, and this guy does get very large very quickly, because you are usually, at least getting a counter every turn, right? But for those turns where we're for sure just getting a treasure token, gaining 2 life, we're really in the driver's seat, staying ahead of our opponent, which has been really good for the deck list. Voice of Resurgence is probably one of the most powerful things to be doing with Delney. Unfortunately, I've never gotten the Delney plus Voice of Resurgence going together, usually because if you have a voice in play and play Delney, they're going to kill the voice pretty quickly, and if you have a Delney in play and play voice, they're going to kill him with this. So you really have to hit them both on Coco, and even then, you're going to lose one of them, because it is such a big threat, right? Skyclave Apparition, we are going to see what happens with this card. I was pretty happy with it early on, because, again, exiling 2 things is pretty great. Getting 2 things off the board with once is great. However, when your opponent is playing a deck that can remove this from the table, It's pretty bad for you if you don't know how the interaction works. When you exile 2 things and this leaves the battlefield, what happens is they get a token that is the combined mana value of both of those permanents. And then, of course, if you have a Delney in play, you will get they will get 2 of that token. So they're going to get not only just a big token, they're going to get potentially 2 of the big tokens. So it's definitely something to watch out for, and something you'll see how we combat in a later version of the deck list. I still think this card is fine in certain matchups, right? Especially because, we have other ways of bouncing their tokens. I think the token's kind of irrelevant. So in, like, say, a control matchup, where they are playing things like temporary lockouts and stuff like that, I don't dislike Cycler versus Skylar, which I think still gets a home in the sideboard of this deck, which we're not going to really go into. We'll talk about some cards I like playing in the sideboard. We're not really going over the sideboard as much today. But Skyclave is definitely a card I will still be playing 1 or 2 of in the board at the very minimum. Aether Channeler is a card I have loved in this deck list. I think this card shines the most with Delney. This is a card that when spoiled, I was very curious on. I mean, it's got 3 relevant modes: drawing a card, bouncing any non-land permanent. I think that's something people forget about this card. It's not just like bouncing a creature, right? You can bounce any non-land permanent. You can bounce a planeswalker. You can bounce a big splashy artifact or enchantment. You can bounce the big dumb creature. It just puts anything non-land back in their hand. It's so good. Like I said, drawing a card and then just even making a 1-1 blocker is solid. So when you're playing Delney into this guy, unlike Gallic Readers, you can pick the same mode twice. So very easily you're able to bounce 2 things. You can draw 2 cards. You can make 2 birds if you just want to kind of get the beat down in because you have a voice token in play. This guy just does everything, and this is the best card in the deck. Even when you don't have Delney in play, I think this card is very, very fun, very solid to play. And that's something I want to stress out of this deck list. I can see a metagame where this deck is more of a threat. Do I think that's right now? Not quite. I do think this deck, though, is a lot of fun. And I can't stress how much fun I've just been kind of playing the deck a little bit in the background. Again, not in a very, very focused sense, but it's kind of testing, feeling the deck out. And usually our friends are just like, Ruckman is living his best life playing this deck list, and it is a lot of fun playing it. They're playing 2 copies of Tishana's Tidebinder, a card that doesn't combo with Delney, but in this company flash style deck list, I do think this is a powerful effect that we want in the 75. Whether or not it should be getting a 2-up in the main board and could just be in the sideboard, not quite sure about just yet. But I think as we see blue-white control and deck lists that are leveraging activated abilities again, becoming more of the forefront of the format, Tishana's Tidebinder is very important. We're playing 4 copies of Reflector Mage. This is the most annoying effect, right, with a Delney in play, bouncing back 2 creatures, making opponent take a turn off of them. You can potentially, with some decks, lock out a hand with doubling this ability. And then, of course, you have Charming Prince to kind of reset any of these big abilities. They're playing 3 copies of Spell Queller. Spell Queller, I have a lot of mixed opinions playing Spell Queller in this deck list after a lot of testing with it. When it's good, it's great. However, Spell Queller here gets pretty awkward when a lot of our cards, right, deal with cards that are on the board already. Reflector Mage, Tidebinder, Channeler, Sky Liberation. We're really responding to a lot of things on the board. And we don't really have a lot of easy mana. We don't have a lot of... Very rarely are we at a point where we have a lot of mana extra lying around that we can leave up a Spell Queller and still be doing something else. So Spell Queller just gets a little awkward when we're trying to Coco, right? We're trying to Coco. Sometimes, we'll whiff on the Spell Queller, and then we're just looking at a bunch of bounce effects on an empty board with opponent. It does get a little awkward. So sometimes there's a lot of case, or, you just kind of, you test it out, you hold the waters. It's just luck of the draw with how it hits. Spell Queller is an amazing effect. I don't think you can not play it right. But I do think that it is still important that we do still play it. If that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's kind of it for the base build. You kind of have a good idea of, we have some early drops to kind of gain us a little bit of momentum that kind of combo with Delney. Not the most impressive thing in the world, but they still do help, right? I mean, like hitting a prospect with Delney in play, we're gaining 2 life, we're hitting 2 treasure. It's pretty good. Like, it's pretty solid acceleration. Now, however, one of the big things is besides Aether Channeler, and the Scry 2 off of Charming Prince, we're really locked in to the draw step here. And that's one of the things I tried to tackle on as we move into looking at the version 2 of the deck list, which is including some copies of Militia Bugler here. Now, Militia Bugler here, Vigilance 2 power, 3 drop. Great worth our wall of 3 drops here, right? However, when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal a creature card with power 2 or less from among them, put it into your hand for the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. So, what are we getting here? We're getting everything in the deck list again, besides the 2 Shoshana's Tidebinders. So now we're a lot less locked into our draw step, and we're finding more creatures that we can hit and play and keep things going when we don't have a Coco in hand, right? Actually helping us set up again for even double spell turns potentially. And then when you have Delney in play, we're getting double triggers off this. We're finding 2 guys. We're really setting up the next board. This card just gets a lot more impressive that way, because especially if your opponent, you have a Coco into this, your opponent can wipe the board, right? You still potentially have at least 2 guys in your hand from doubling this trigger to keep your board going. And that's one of the things I think when you look at, especially in Pioneer, when the various versions of spirits become more relevant. Coco is when you just want when like Banner is relevant, you want the big aggressive, like big plays. When things like Azorius or Mono Blue are better, that's when you're playing the curiosity effects, you're drawing cards. And that's one of the biggest issues with company decks is a lot of the times they don't really have ways to get out of their draw steps still. Especially with Pioneer's very, very card advantage aggressive. I mean, every deck is drawing cards in the form, every deck is filtering their draw step, and you just can't be left behind. And so adding Militia Bugler here was our attempt at not getting left behind, essentially. So how do we do it? Well, we went ahead and we dropped 2 copies of Voice of Resurgence. Again, these are cards that I would probably put those 2 extra copies in the board, or at least one of them in the board, right? And we dropped them 2 copies of Gala Greeters. Like I was saying, with the version 1 of the deck, Gala Greeters was very impressive. No doubt this card was very impressive. But when it relies you to have a follow-up play, it just kind of sits there on an empty board, right? Like, at least if you're Cocoing into Prosperous Innkeeper, if you're Cocoing into Gilded Goose, it's leaving you a food token, it's leaving you a treasure token. If you're like just hitting Gala Greeters, it relies on having follow-up plays, and this kind of tends to be a win more card. Now again, it is very impressive. Getting those treasure tokens every turn do help us progress and move the mana base forward, helping us hit multiple plays a turn. But, we need Militia Bugler type effects or the draw ability of Aether Channeler. And again, why this card I think is so impressive in the deck list. Because usually we're bouncing a thing and drawing a card, right? Or we're double drawing a card. You just need to keep drawing cards. You need to keep drawing cards in a sense, right? You need to keep putting creatures into your hand, keep things going forward. We don't want to be without a hand. We want to keep the board going. We want to keep on the back foot, bouncing things back to their hand, right? Counting the Spell Queller, shutting things down with Shoshana's Tidebinder. Those are things we want to be doing, and we can't do that without creature cards in our hand adding to the board. So, where do we go from this build, right? This build felt really good. Now, I will say, things like Sky Collaboration, we talked about earlier, still very awkward, not the most effective removal spell, right? Gilded Goose, Prosperous Innkeeper, Gala Greeters. Pretty decent, pretty solid acceleration. Gilded Goose, not the best. Usually with Gilded Goose, we're only going to get one activation out of it, unless we're hitting it off of Delney in play, then we're maybe getting two, right? Very rarely do we want to have a point in time. I was very rarely finding myself with the ability to activate to make additional food tokens, right? So Gilded Goose, we're going to play it, we're going to get one shot of it, and that's kind of it. But hopefully, we're hitting it to hit our turn 3 company, and that's opening up the game for us. Process Innkeepers, again, it's great for the aggressive matchups. We're hitting the treasure token, and then opponent has to kill it. Because if we hit Delney, even just without Delney in play, playing guys every turn, gaining 2, 3, 4 life over the course of a game can be enough to put the game away against a lot of aggressive decks in this format. So, like I said, where do we go from the version 2, right? Like, I think Militia Bugler here is probably the most important change to the deck list. Now I think we're going to look at one of the most powerful changes to the deck list, and that is bringing in the 1-mana elves. We're looking at Llanowar Elves, we're looking at Elvish Mystic. So obviously we cut the Gala Greeters, we cut Prosperous Innkeeper, we cut Gilded Goose. So we cut all 8 of those for the Mana Dorks here, because these are going to be a repeated, recurring mana acceleration, right? If they hit removal spell, that's fine. We can let opponent take their turn off. That way, that means less removal likely to hit like Delney. I think one of the biggest downsides to Delney is that she is 2 toughness. That's a really great downside, because I think if she was 3 toughness, this card gets insanely pushed. But the fact that she can be blown over by any sort of stiff wind, I think, is a really good balancing aspect of the card. Now, one thing I do like about this deck list is it is still viable when Delney isn't in play. It's hell of a lot better when Delney is in play, right? Like, it is way more impressive when we're doubling and doing all these cool things, but we don't need Delney. Delney also does help us kind of get through big board blockers. That second ability is lethal. I've won a lot of games just by opponent going like, here's some 3 power, guys, go. And I just said, yeah, no, they can't do anything. Like, you're not doing anything, right? So, yeah, having the Mana Elves here, the Mana Dorks here, whatever you want to call them, the C3W tag team creature wrestling, the wrestling champions here, right? The opposing champions to Chris and Ricky. These guys, they are consistent mana acceleration, and I think, like I said, Militia Bugler gave us the most important upgrade to the deck list, and gave us more consistency, keeping us going, keeping us better plays. But this is the big push, the big power change to the deck list here. Not as cute, we're obviously losing some Delney synergy, but having that recurring additional mana every turn, and even when we're sitting in our hand, right, you can slip one of these guys out, and they're easy to kind of fit into our curve as we're marching up to Coco's, right? If Llanowar Elf is helping us plank a turn, we have like turn 1 mana Llanowar Elf into Voice. Usually, though, we're not going to really have a 2-drop. You're going to want to hold into your Charming Princes as long as possible to reset some of these big creatures. But yeah, just being able to use Llanowar Elves to slide in an additional Mana Dork and just keep growing our board is very important. So we start double spelling and really turning the tide of the game. And of course, the other change here, like I hinted at earlier, was we finally got rid of Sky Collaboration for Kite Sail Larcenist. For those that don't know, Kite Sail Larcenist is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flying ward 1. Enters the battlefield for each player. Choose up to 1 target artifact or creature that player controls. For as long as remaining in the battlefield, the chosen permanent becomes treasure artifacts with sacrifice this and lose all other abilities. So one thing to point out is this is kind of relevant and works with Skyclap Apparition because Kite Sail Larcenist lets you target. You get to pick permanents on your side of the board too. So like if we kept Skyclap Apparition, one thing we could do still is Larcenist or an Apparition out of the board. So we were going to put Skyclaps in the board, right? Like I said. But Skyclap out of the board means that you can Larcenist, take away its abilities, and then like immediately get rid of the treasure token. Immediately use that treasure for something else, right? That way if they do deal with Larcenist, they're not getting it back. So the trade-off here is yes. Larcenist locks you down into only hitting artifacts and creatures. However, for the most part, we're really only worried about creatures. kind of getting in our way. Artifacts has been kind of relevant through the rise of In Soul. Being able to deal with certain things like that has been pretty relevant. Sometimes it can be a little dicey giving opponent the treasure token, but if you're hitting a big creature like Shieldred, right, I'm pretty happy to have my opponent sack their Shieldred away to get off like an extra fatal push, right? Ward 1 also means that this is harder to kill than Sky Coverage, and flying means we can get a little bit more damage without having active Delney in play. So this card is big bonus. If we're looking at trying to fill out what the sideboard looks like, I would play 2 Skyclave in the board, maybe 1 more of these guys. This card is very impressive, and again, when you have a Delney in play, treasuring like 2 of your opponent's creatures is just insane. Also, because you have Ward 1, that is a triggered ability, so your Ward ability will trigger twice. So do not forget that. Delney plus Kitesail Arsonist gives you essentially 2 instances of Ward 1. So do not forget that ability. That's very, very funny when an opponent thinks they have the correct play there. So like I said, check out here probably next week. Hopefully I'm feeling a lot more better. I'm getting pretty over the COVID right now, so I'm expecting to kind of be in more of a I can play Magic on camera for people headspace, so probably look out for gameplay, mostly with this version of the deck list, and with a complete sideboard at that point. Gameplay probably with the next week. I hope this talk and kind of how I've looked at tackling the weaknesses of the deck list and start trying to improve our deck list can kind of help some of our newer players to the format, newer players to Magic, with kind of taking a look at what downsides your deck has, right? Like, we want consistent additional mana to make sure we're playing 2 spells a turn, so that's why the Mana Elves are better than our Treasure Makers, right? Militia Bugler helping us fill our hand, get more guys into our hands so that we're not running out of things to do. Very important, right? So I hope this kind of is a fun look at a deck list that I've been really enjoying. And again, I can't stress enough how fun this deck is. I think it makes for a great, if you just want to have fun and explore queues, if you want to have a fun time, and your like local store is a very like mid-range heavy Pioneer scene, right? This deck list is a whole lot of fun. So be sure to, if you're going to pick up some cards, make sure you go head on over to our friends and our affiliate link over at TCG Player, going to Crew3A to redirect you to our TCG Player affiliate page, where you buy some awesome cards that you're going to buy anyway. That'll help support the show and help us keep making wonderful content like that. So thank you to our friends over at TCG Player for helping us set that link up with them. So yeah, be sure to use that if you're going to buy cards for Delney, or if you're going to play. This weekend is going to be Pro Tour Chicago, so I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about the next week or so. And then there's a BNR announcement in a few weeks. So obviously there's been a lot of big shakeups in Pioneer recently. Kind of interested to see what happens, honestly. Do I think action should be taken? I think I'm going to save that for the podcast for you to listen in on my opinions of. But so thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you again. Shout out to our wonderful Patreon, patreon.com/Crew3MTG. Make sure you like, favorite, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Talk to you next time. Bye.